Well, ladies and gentlemen, here's a big shocker. Looks like it's going to be a bidding war for the Washington Commanders' new stadium. Will it be in D.C.? Will it be in Maryland? Or will it be in Virginia? Well, right now it looks like possibly either D.C. at the former RFK site or possibly staying in Maryland. Remember, they're at Landover right now at the worst stadium in the NFL, now Commanders Field. FedEx realized the stadium was so bad, so they dropped their name. They didn't want to be associated with it. I'm kidding, although maybe not, I don't know, but it is now called Commanders Field. You can see the recent headline: Maryland senator wants binding agreement with Commanders about future of Commanders Field in Prince George's County. The Prince George's County Executive's Office has warned the team to not turn their backs on the community they've called home for almost 30 years. So possibly pressure on Josh Harris. And if you read this article, I'll go skim through it really quickly, and you'll note that this does look like it's becoming a bidding war. It does look like this stadium could potentially be, I don't know, this is just speculation, 50-50 maybe, depending on where it goes, whether it's in D.C., whether it's in Maryland. I'm not sure the appetite D.C. has to fund something like that. I know a lot of the fans want it in DC because it is a really nice site. It was a former, stadium, multi-purpose stadium, wasn't very good, but still, when it comes to this future stadium, this actually came out on July 4th, outside of Commanders Field. The team's search for a new stadium includes three options: the current site, and by the way, if you look at the current site, they could build a new stadium while still playing games at Commanders Field. It's really not a problem based on how big it is and the desert of parking. I really don't think they're going to stay in Landover. This feels like Maryland's a little bit desperate here, but we'll see. Maybe, they offer something good. That's where the stadium could be. And I'm guessing if they do decide to stay at the current site, there would be built up buildings obviously surrounding it. They would make it to where public transportation can more easily access it, and you're trying to alleviate that just disgusting parking lot desert. But certainly in a spot like that in Landover, you're going to need significant parking. It's completely different at the RFK site, and then they also list a spot in Virginia as a possible option for the new stadium. Although Virginia seems like, based on the dialogue I've heard the past 4 or 5 months, it's kind of fallen back to third place. Not that that really matters at this point unless something happens. I mean, Virginia could come out tomorrow and offer the best deal and get the stadium there. We just don't know. Normally these things come down to the best deal. I don't know how much Josh Harris, who is the now owner of the Commanders, he paid like $6 billion for them, or like 5.5, but I don't know how much he's going to take fan input into this rather than just going pure business and pure best deal, because obviously the fans are going to want it at the RFK site. But for that to happen, legislation giving D.C. long-term control of the federal land RFK sits on needs to pass the Senate. Right now, both of Maryland's senators are signaling potential opposition to that bill, largely over concerns about what would happen to the stadium site. So there's a little political stuff when it comes to both of the Maryland senators do not want to give up the Commanders, so they're opposing the bill that would allow the Commanders stadium to be built on the RFK footprint. Pretty amazing, and I would imagine there's probably going to have to be some type of backhand, agreement to get these senators to agree on it, or they're going to want some type of handout or some type of deal when it comes to that area where the stadium currently sits. They have leverage right now with the idea of opposing the federal land where they can build the stadium at the site of RFK. They have that leverage to where if they oppose it, they can hold it up and they can get something out of this deal. So I'm guessing that's more so what this is, rather than building a brand new stadium in Landover, which really would not make sense for the Commanders, especially when you look at the way stadiums are going. You want them right next to kind of a bigger population center. It's easier. It alleviates the travel problems. It alleviates the parking and all of that. That's not to say it couldn't work. I mean, you could put an NFL stadium in the middle of nowhere and it would be fine, just because the demand is so high and there's only 8 or 9 home games a year. But in general, I would expect still, even with this news, the new stadium, the dialogue right now tells me it's going to be at the RFK site, but there is going to have to be something worked out with these two senators who right now are using leverage, and obviously I'm sure people in Maryland would be pretty pissed off if they didn't get something out of this, considering they're possibly going to lose the Commanders, although we know these situations are always weird because they're still the Washington Commanders. Yeah, they're playing in Landover, but I mean, it'd be one thing to go from the Maryland Commanders to the Washington Commanders if they went from Maryland to D.C., but they're already D.C.'s East team as it is, so it's not really anything crazy. You could say, well, Maryland's losing them, but they never really had them. I mean, yes, the stadium is in Maryland, but the team is still called Washington. So that's just my opinion on the entire situation. And I would imagine, as the article later talks about, there could be a potential bidding war between 3 different sites, possibly 2 sites, depending. I actually don't know if there would be a potential, site in Maryland. I would imagine it would be a different site than where they're talking about, because when they initially talked about a new stadium, this was with the previous ownership back in 2015, 2016, they were talking about a different city, Oxon Hill in Maryland, and then there was another city. Neither of them were like at the current site in Landover. So I would imagine if they do pitch for a new stadium in Maryland, which they might do as kind of like an ultimatum, well, you can get a new stadium, but it has to be in Maryland. We're going to hold up the RFK federal land thing that doesn't allow you to build a new stadium on that site. You can build it in Maryland. It's not going to be in Landover. We're going to put you closer to a population center, make it easier for you, but still keep the team in Maryland and potentially generate revenue for people in Maryland in terms of that. It'll help the foot traffic. It'll potentially help a lot of those businesses if you put a stadium near them. So that seems to be the update. And then they also talked about the timeline for this potential project. It says without a site even selected yet, fans can now be looking at 2030 before the team has a new stadium, wherever it is. Yeah, I would say 2029 or 2030. It just depends how fast they move this along. You compare it to some other situations like the Browns and the Bears. They want to have new stadiums by 2028, but they do seem further along in the process than the Commanders. So I would imagine that it probably would be 2029 just based off the fact that Commanders Field is in such a dire situation and you really wouldn't need an agreement until next year. And then honestly, you could start construction to have it open in 2029 in early 2027 or even like late 2026. So you could go next year and do what the Browns and the Bears are doing right now, which is find a site, negotiate, and then begin construction the next year, and then it would be ready in 2029. You could technically fast track it and have it ready in 2028. The problem is it seems like this is going to be some type of situation that's going to take months to play out to get everything untangled and make sure they can build the new stadium on the RFK site. So when it comes to DC, Maryland, Virginia, Maryland making a play, trying to get something out of this, it's pretty obvious, and you really can't blame them. That's what the Senators, should do. And then you do have DC. I still think that's where the new stadium will be. We do not have any new renderings on it or anything like that. But just overall, that is the current situation. And then I also did want to talk about, there haven't been many stadium videos for me recently. Honestly, a lot of that has to do with the election. And also, I really can't find much news on stadiums right now. I feel like it's a real lull. There's just nothing to talk about. If there is something that comes out like the Brown situation, I'll talk about it. I mean, I'd like to see some renderings or something like that. But there is just, you hit these lulls when it comes to stadium news, renovations, new stadiums, things like that. That's really what I cover. And then also kind of bleeding into it is like the expansion relocation aspect of everything. But there just hasn't been a lot of news. I'd be fine with doing a stadium video every other day or something like that. But when there's no news, I'm just not going to do it. And even this news is kind of like, Maryland, I would imagine they just want some type of money or they want some type of deal. And then they'll agree to the federal land and they'll be able to build their new stadium at the RFK site. That is just my take when it comes to that. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.